Today we are going to be discussing a kind of a taboo subject and a thing that a lot of people kind of would rather sweep under the rug, but I feel it's really important that we get these things out of the way and talk about them. So, if you just watching to the channel, my background is converting to Catholic. I didn't have a religious background growing up or anything like that. Uh, but whenever you are converting, no matter what, you are called Catholic. So you are called a convert. So, and as converting to the Catholic Church, I love it. I love my priest. I love everything about it. I've had a great time. But obviously, there are some things that happen in the church that I feel should be discussed and shouldn't be swept under the rug. We need to shine a light on these things for many reasons. One, so it never happens again. Two, so we acknowledge that it did happen and move on from it. And three, so that we're vigilant in the future of these things happening. Because unfortunately, everybody is fallible. If you're a person, you're fallible. We are not God. We were not created perfect. So every person has the chance to be fallible. So today we're going to talk about corruption in the Catholic Church. All right. The things we're going to discuss, we're mainly going to stick to two eras of it, when it first started and how the corruption got to be and stuff like that, and then we're going to get into the modern corruption and stuff like that, the sex scandal. But there's also some things during the 40s and the 80s that were not so well. Some after war ties to the Nazis, and during the 80s some ties to the mafia with some banking things going on. So those are the two things we're going to discuss today. um, as an intro to the Catholic Church has been around, one of the longest standing institutions, one of the most powerful institutions to exist, right? They are, but that started out as the story of Jesus. You had the Old Testament, which is half of it, but Christians specifically believe in the New Testament, which Christ fulfilled the Old Testament by coming into our life and stuff like that. So as the church grew, obviously it wasn't much, but as it grew and as it got powerful, it eventually became one of the most powerful institutions in the world, not just in its area, in the world. And after the fall of the Roman Empire, the church actually started to take on a lot of different things like that the state usually would take over. So we're talking things like the sewers, maintenance, general upkeep, things with the community, which the church, it was very different back then. Not a lot of people knew how to read. So you would go to your church and your mass in the church, they only had one Bible. It wasn't like there was Bibles for everyone, because there was no printing press where we could print off 1,000 of these like today. There was one book, one copy of the book, and the whole church thing was, that's how it was disseminated down to you by God's chosen people, the clergy and stuff like that, which the Pope is God's chosen representative, I guess you could say. So yeah, so that's what we're gonna talk about today. We're just gonna own it. We're gonna own it. I'm not a person. I take accountability for the things that I've done wrong. I know when I've done wrong, and I feel that's just something that should be practiced in everyday life. We ain't sweeping nothing under the rug here. So come along with me today as we talk about corruption in the Catholic Church. Let's go. So, when we are talking about corruption in the Catholic Church, or in the church specifically, there's a couple eras to this that we're going to go over. So, we're going to go over the medieval era, and well, corruption is absolute power corrupts absolutely. So, anybody that gets any sort of power, there's the corruption. It doesn't follow far behind those things. So, the church, the Catholic Church started as a bunch of smaller sects. Obviously, they were persecuted. If you don't know, Christians were persecuted. Christianity was not always the biggest religion. You had a lot of what we call pagan religions now. So these guys were persecuted for their beliefs. It's a lot different of a time where I can just say I'm a Christian and not really have to worry about it. 2,000 years ago, you said you were a Christian, that they might come burn you at the stake. So, but that changed, obviously. So as they went along and as the time went on, we're going from 0 AD up to about the 1500s when we're talking about this time. So the 1500s is probably where the Catholic Church had like its most pinnacle point of power before the Martin Luther separation, the Protestant Reformation. So, and a lot of that is what caused the Protestant Reformation. So, as we were growing up, yeah, or as we were growing up, as the church was growing up, let's say, and becoming more and more powerful, it had lands and stuff that were bequeathed to them. So, as it was, let's say, as it was getting powerful, you would have these positions. Obviously, you would have the people that ran the church, that ran that area's church. So it's like you have the person that runs that area's church, they answer to somebody who runs the wider area, up into the country, up into the state, up into earth, up into the state, up into the country, up into the world. Then there's the pope who oversees everybody. So as these positions became very lucrative, because so the thing is, so it's a lot it's not really different than today, because it is the kind of same today, but it was different in a way that the church kind of ran your whole life. So it's like when we're talking about corruption in the church and these powerful positions, so you would get like the deacon and stuff like that, and the bishops of the which I am not 100% on the terminology for the Catholic people that lead it. We're going to just say the lead priest. If you wanted that position, well, you could pull some strings, and if your family had some money, this is probably where the corruption. This is where I would say this is where I'm saying the corruption started, because I'm sure there was corruption before that. Anywhere that there is anything, there can be corruption. So, but as these positions became more powerful, they owned lands, they collected tax revenues. We're going to go into the amount of different taxes and different fees that you would pay, and it's kind of, yeah, they wouldn't get away with it today. Let's just say that much. But these positions came with power, obviously, and revenue. So if you were a family that had some means, you could pull your money together, get debts, get loans, which is kind of funny because it's like, so then they would pay for these positions, that you would then become the person who collects the taxes and owns the land. So it's like, well, and it's like a lot of times these people to get into this, because it happens today. It happens today. What did Donald Trump have to do to get to be the president? He had to shill out for everybody to get, some say a lot of Jewish money, which is why we're at war with Iran. But let's disregard that. We're not talking about that. But it's kind of the same thing. You had to go around and pull up this money to get this position, and then after you get in, boy, that's when you make your money, and that's when you make your nut, so to speak, as a squirrel. If we're speaking as a squirrel getting its nut, but that's what that would happen. So, and it's unfortunate because them doing this to get that's why corruption is such a bad thing, because it corrupts absolutely, and it trickles down to hurt the lowest people every single time. So it's not like these are victimless crimes, because after this bishop or archpriest, archdiocese, whatever, they would get in and then they would start squeezing their parishioners for money. And it's like, well, then how would we squeeze those parishioners for money? So they had a death tax and annual an annual tithe of 10%. So once a year you just gave 10% of your crop, because it's like a lot of people didn't have money back then. So when you give a tithe, now we give money because we have money, but back then you would give part of your crop. If you were a farmer, you would give 10% of your crop to the church. And so you had, a death tax. When you die, there's a tax you have to pay. There's a tax to get baptized. There was a tax to be married. There was a tax to be buried. And that's different from the death tax. The death tax and the tax to be buried are two different taxes. And then, yeah, stuff like that. That's how they would squeeze, and they would squeeze money out of their parishioners. Oh, hey, maybe you could tithe a little bit more this year. Come on, man. That doesn't even look like 10%. So these are some of the methods they would use to kind of make it. And it's unfortunate because you go from, and there's a lot that deals with this in any institution. So the church was made for the love of Jesus. Let's be real. Yeah, that's what we're here for. We're here for the big man. And unfortunately, when you get an institution that becomes so established and has such a reputation, the cover-ups begin trying to protect the reputation of that institution. And it went on for so long, and that's the part that I'm going to talk about too, because really there's people alive today that have covered up some very heinous shit in the Catholic Church. and there were a lot of methods they would use to cover that shit up, but that's going to be later in the video. So we're going to recap a little bit. We were talking about the church, we're talking about corruption in the church, talking about how the church got to be big, where the corruption came from, and what it looked like a little bit. So, and that for the most part is what we're. So as the church became more and more powerful leading up to the Protestant Reformation, I think and that was one of the biggest things. So one of the biggest things that caused all of this is indulgences. Well, and the selling of indulgences. So as a Christian, we believe when you die, you go to purgatory. I'm not 100% on this, but we're going to talk. It's the indulgences came because when you have sins in the afterlife, you're supposed to work those sins off. So if you got an indulgence that's like a piece of paper saying, hey, you don't have to go work that off. This is since you did this, you don't have to do that after you die, which is in itself, it's like, okay, come on now. And people at the time saw the hypocrisy. It was everywhere. It was ridiculous. And that's like where it led up to where the corruption, we're still in the medieval times. We're not talking the modern times. The medieval corruption that's what it's seen as that's what it peaked at, was selling these indulgences to pay. And they paid for St. Peter's Basilica, beautiful place, awesome. But it's widely reported that that's one of the biggest fundings of that basilica, the place, was it came from selling indulgences. So, and I mean, you can justify things all you want, but really, that's not. And it doesn't do it today. Obviously, the church doesn't sell indulgences today, so we're good there. But and that's what led up to the Protestant Reformation, which is a video I don't know if I'm gonna touch. But the Protestant Reformation was led by Martin Luther. He was a guy that during the 1500s took a look at all the corruption going on in the church and was like, no. And he on Halloween Day he nailed his 95 thesis, which the thesis were all the complaints he pretty much had about the Catholic Church. And he split off and he did his own thing. And that led to every single denomination we have today. Eventually, honestly, that's where it all came from. So if you want to, track it all back. And that's part of the reason why I am Catholic and choosing to become Catholic, is because I love this history. I think it's really interesting and I think it's really important that we talk about it. So, but it's like, well, how can I say that? It's like, how can I say that I love all this stuff, but then not talk about the most glaring things going on with it? So with this video, my hope is that, hey, we're talking about it, discussing it, and we're always going to be vigilant for corruption and going on in the future. It's not like, hey, we did this and now we're good. No, hey, we're doing this now and we're always going to look out for that. Because, I mean, honestly, protecting the next generation is the most important thing that you could ever do. I don't have any kids. I am not a father. I am not married. Uh, really, when it comes to kids, I'm like, hey, you guys kind of stay over there, because it's like, if you're a guy that doesn't have any kids and you're interested in kids, there might be something fucking wrong with you, buddy. So I don't have any kids, but they are obviously the future of our society and our civilization. So maybe we want to make sure that they make it there untouched. And I mean, that's your job as a man. Maybe, I think that's all very important, and that's something we were going to talk about. Well, we already talked about it. So we're moving on to the next. This was we were talking about the corruption, 1500, going up to the 1500s, and what led to the Protestant Reformation. The things that kind of were the biggest glaring things of this that's going on is, and they call it simony. Oh my god. I'm not perfect, guys. Still figuring out this video stuff, but it's called simony. So the act of selling positions in the church is called simony. Why is it called simony, Jesse? It's called simony because it was named after Simon Magus. Who is Simon Magus? Really nobody important. But no, he was a guy during the times of the Bible and whatever, and he was a Persian guy, and he saw everybody going around, and whenever you get baptized, that's like you get the Holy Spirit in you. I'm not a priest, we're not covering that. But this guy followed those people around and saw that they were doing that, and he's like, hey, I want that. I want to be able to baptize people and give them the power of Jesus. How much does that cost? Can I buy that? And obviously, no, you can't. Well, back then, that's fine. Well, back then, they might have sold it to him, because that's kind of the shit that was going on. But, yeah. Simon Mangus made simony because he was like, "Hey, will you sell me? Will you sell me the ability to baptize people and give them the spirit of Jesus?" And no, Superman, no, we can't be doing that. No, so, yeah, that's what So that the simony was a huge thing. I mean, obviously, that's corruption at its core. When you're selling things, it's like you're supposed to be in the church because you want to give your life to God and give your life over to God and not make money. Which I think now they do the things of chastity. You take on a vow of chastity a lot of times where you say you'll only make under a certain amount, so that kind of keeps it out of the spotlight, or I don't know, whatever. But that's what was going on led up to the 1500s with that. And I mean, you had the Protestant Reformation and stuff, and this stuff still went on. The corruption didn't stop; it went on. I mean, I'm not exactly. I think they eventually did stop. Obviously, they don't sell those things anymore, and they kind of reformed. There were Vatican councils that saw these problems and reformed on them in various ways. But I mean, corruption never stops, unfortunately, as we've discussed like 10 times. So, but that's pretty much the corruption going up to the 1500s. So, and like I said, we're only covering two areas in this, because it's the most interesting things. So the medieval era of what they were doing back then, and then the modern era. So it's like what happened in the 16th, 17th, and 1800s. I mean, go find somebody else. Today we're doing the 15 up to 0 to 1500, and then like 1940s to today. If you want time frame between that, maybe I'll make another video. But all right. All right, guys. So now we're gonna start covering the modern corruption, and this might be the touchy part, not the beginning, but when we get into the later things, might be a little bit touchy for some people. So I do want to drop a disclaimer. It will be in the description. We are going to be covering some topics about SA involving you know children. Not specifically, I'm not talking about any specific cases or anything like that. We are not doing that. I'm not covering that, but we are covering the overall scandal, how it was covered up, and what was done about that to correct that now. So, but first we're going to start with like the 1940s after World War II. And it's kind of shocking finding out about these things. So one of the big things that out of the 1940s that came out of it is, well, I mean, they had a lot. So, unfortunately, the bank, we were in Rome, Italy. Italy was part of the Axis, not the good guys, not the Allies. So, in the 1940s, when this was going on, that if you didn't know, the the church the church's bank and all the funds and everything to do with that are completely separate from the country of Italy and anywhere else. There's religious freedom. We don't like in America, they don't have to pay taxes and stuff, and they don't have to disclose things about how much money they make and stuff like that, which I'm not exactly sure about that, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. But so this ambiguity and stuff was used during the 1940s to move Nazi money around. It's very unfortunate, but it is what it is. Hey, it is what it is. They at the time, who knew which side was the good and bad? So you probably could tell. But anyway, so in the 1940s, there was a bank established, and this is the bank that they have up until today. It's called the IOR, or the Institute for Religious Works. This is a Catholic bank. It's kind of separate from the bank, and it's its own entity, but it's also not controlled by the government or anything like this. And those things are, it's unfortunate because when you have bad people in the world, they look at something like that and they go, oh, I could use this for my means. So it's like the 1940s, there was some Nazi money because the Nazis robbed Europe during the 1940s when they invaded. They fucking robbed the place blind. Well, it has come out that a lot of that money was moved through the Catholic Church into different savings and then dispensed who knows where, because that isn't tracked. But what was tracked and what did come out was there were generous taxes, I think they were called. Um, It was like big amounts of money. We're talking millions of dollars, and this is in the 1940s, so the money's worth even more. But a lot of that money that was moved through the Vatican accounts, the IOR works, the religious works, that stuff was moved and it wasn't disclosed. But what was disclosed was two church tax payments of like $9 million. They just got as, hey, I mean, and let me tell you, nobody's that's out here handing somebody else $9 million for nothing. So, you know, we can look at that and say they probably took money. Then when they robbed the place and stuff like that, they probably took the money, moved it through the accounts, and then it could be sent to whoever it needed to be sent to. Untraceable, couldn't be traced. And the other thing from the 1940s that was, this is pretty despicable, but so the Holocaust happened. If you don't know about the Holocaust, that's not something I'm going to be covering. But very, very tragic. 6 million Jews died. It was very tragic. But what the church did was like even more of a slap in the face. So the church had insurance policies on these people that were in these camps and died in these camps. A lot of the time they would group the policies together. So if these 10 people were in the camp, it was grouped. If they had life insurance policies, they grouped those together and went to the life insurance place and were like, hey, you need to pay us out for this. They got the payout and then turned around when the victim's family came looking for the compensation that they were rightly owed, they didn't get it. And the loophole that was done for this was very despicable. This isn't the same church and stuff, but if you look at a Holocaust, so whenever the people died, obviously if you were exterminated in a Nazi concentration camp, you weren't given a death certificate. And that is the loophole that this institution used to not pay people that deserved this money. And they got the money from the insurance company, but didn't pay it out. They just kept it. And then they would say, hey, well, we need a death certificate. We need a piece of paper proving they were killed in the camp. That doesn't exist. They knew it didn't exist. And I've heard that, the funny thing is, I've heard that loophole used today for a couple of things. So it's very, very interesting how there's the same old bag of tricks that gets pulled out every now and again. That's why we gotta learn them, guys. That's why we gotta learn these tricks, and we gotta know, and we gotta watch out for people that are trying to do something like that. That is unscrupulous, bro. Your grandma died in the Holocaust. Your whole fucking everything's gone, and it's like, oh, there was a life insurance policy. Maybe we could go get that and get some of our life back or whatever. And the church's like, sorry, sorry. Come on now. But yeah, that's the 1940s, and then the IOR, this Institute of Religious Works, as a bank in the whole, it's not that great of a thing. And we're going to talk about why it can even exist, because it almost exists in spite of the church, but it exists because it makes up a shortfall. So, and we're going to discuss that. But that was the 1940s, so that's like the 1940s era when we're starting with the corruption and stuff, and that leads us into, this went on from like obviously this went on more than the 40s, went on 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, but we're gonna get into next, which is the 80s and the mafia ties and stuff, and this is really where I was like, holy shit. But that's what we're gonna talk about next. So we're in the 1980s. We just finished talking about, obviously to recap, we had the church and the medieval corruption, selling the positions in the church for money, and then selling indulgences, which led to the Protestant Reformation. Over that, we're in the 1940s. The Institute of Religious Works was created. It's a bank for the Pope. God's bank for the Pope. They did some unscrupulous things like fucking people out of their life insurance settlements, which leads us to the 80s. And I wasn't born in the 80s. I was born in the 90s. It's funny. Sometimes I'm like nostalgic for a time where I wasn't alive. But what was huge in the 80s? The mafia. The mafia was huge in the 80s in America. But where did the mafia come from? Where's the homeland? Sicily, Italy. Where's Rome in Italy? So it's almost natural. It's almost natural that these things came together. So there's a couple of things that we talked about, like the church having a sovereign sovereign fund where they can't be investigated and they can't be made to disclose what they're doing with their money, stuff like that. Who's that? Who does that sound? It's like, who does that sound really good for? Well, criminals. Criminals that need to launder money. And that's what we're going to be getting into, this money laundering scheme where the Catholic Church took heroin money and put it in. Heroin money was smuggled from Sicily to, from France to Sicily, where it was deposited in Vatican accounts in Rome. So they got the heroin, which the heroin was a whole thing about being smuggled too with the mafia and stuff like that. It's a whole thing, which I might cover, but the proceeds were then laundered through the Catholic Church. There was a sovereign fund, and they called it. And so, with the '80s and the corruption and the mafia and everything else and the money laundering, it all came. They had a term what they called the Catholic Church. When the IOR was first made, it quickly became. Had a reputation as the best offshore bank account that one could get. So. It's almost like there was corruption right from the beginning for this, and it's like if you're looking at it now, it's like I would abolish that whole fucking thing, but we're not, so we're gonna go into that. But Institute for Religious Works, which is the bank, it was called the Holy Laundromat. Why was it called the Holy Laundromat? Well, because you could take some money, put it in there, wash it, and it comes out clean. Oh, so great. I'm backed by the church. And they didn't do this alone. Obviously, they needed there was private bank. So they had their own bank, but in Italy there are other banks, obviously. And that brings into another actor who we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about three people. So for this time in this era, the most important people that we need to discuss are the following. Number one is Archbishop Paul McInnes. He was the guy that, he was quoted as saying, you can't run the church on Hail Marys. It's kind of like, well, why are you doing all this? So, he's the Archbishop. He was overseeing a lot of this. Allegedly, because I don't think a lot of this was proven, so this is alleged that he was the one running this behind the operation and knew very well what was going on. The second guy that we need to talk about is the private banker, Armand. The bank is called Armand. It's like Armand. So as we're talking about the corruption in the 1980s with the Catholic Church and the mafia, there's three people that we want to talk about. So number one is Archbishop Paul McInnes. He was the head chairman of the IOR, the Bank of Institute of Religious Works. That's the bank we're talking about, but that is through the Vatican. That's not a private bank. But there's also a private bank named Banco Embragio or something like that, which we're going to do our best with the pronunciations. Please try to stay with me for them. But Banco Embragio is led by a guy named Roberto Calvi, and he's going to become important as the guy that kind of shows when the end is coming. But so he was the guy that ran, and he's the guy that kind of made this all possible too. So you have Paul McInnes, Archbishop Paul McInnes, who runs the IOR Bank, and then we got Roberto Calvi, who runs Banco Embragio, or he's the lead chairman on it. And these two are kind of in cahoots with each other. And then we have our third guy named Lucio Gelli. I think is that guy. We'll throw him up there. And the third guy we're talking about is Lucio Gelli, which he is important because this dude is. This dude's like the Illuminati, fucking. So he was the head master at the Masonic Lodge, which eventually became to be illegal because they were trying to overthrow the government, of a society called P2. And I am gonna do a video on P2 because they're like the Illuminati. That's what the Illuminati was before it was what we know as the Illuminati today. And that's like without a doubt this guy. He was the propaganda master, and he kind of pulled the strings in the back because P2 had so many members from the clergy, from people in government in Italy, from all walks of life. So he could pull all the strings and make a lot of these deals happen in the background, kind of hush people that might have questions and stuff like that. So let's cover. We have Archbishop Paul McGuinness, head of the lead chairman of the IOR, and quote the guy that was quoted as saying you can't run the bank on Hail Marys, which is. Then you got Roberto Calvi, who is the leader of Banco Ambrogio, which is the guy that he's the guy, the private one that made this all happen too. So, and then third you got, why can't I remember these names suck. Licio Gelli, the fucking propaganda master. So, how did this work? So, they smuggled heroin into America, sold heroin through whatever means to do that, got the money, brought it back, smuggled it into Sicily. Then the money was deposited into the Vatican Bank. The Vatican Bank then, with the help of Banco Ambrogio, Roberto Calvi. Back up. So Roberto Calvi, to help Archbishop Paul McGuinness, then creates 10 to 15 shell companies, which I'm going to assume that if you're watching these videos, you're not a retard. I don't know, that might be a big jump. But if you don't know what an offshore is, that's very shady business practices. A lot of times, shell companies are set up offshore to move money around legally. So, this guy Roberto Calvi, he's the one who started setting up these accounts. He said it's like 10 to 15 different offshore accounts. Well, they're businesses. Those aren't offshore. I mean, they are, but those are businesses in name only. But so then the money that was deposited in the Vatican accounts were then spread out to these 15 places, and they wrote. There's a papal letter. The Archbishop Paul McGuinness then wrote letters saying that these 10 to 15 companies have dealings with the Catholic Church, kind of backing them up. And it's like, well, why did he do that? So it goes one step further. It kind of shows how insidious this becomes, because it wasn't only that we're laundering money from drugs. It gets to be then they start borrowing massive amounts of money. So then with that money, so it's like, okay, so then with that money, that little bit of money, which is still a lot of money if we're talking money, because, but it's like, so they took millions to get billions. So the money was deposited. Roberto Calvi makes these shell corporations. The money's then sent to him. Archbishop Paul McGuinness writes the letters of. Oh my god. The letters of something. My notes suck, bro. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. Just so you guys know, I know these topics already, and then I do about 2 to 3 days worth of research where I write the notes down. But it's like I write the notes down, I don't even look at the fucking things, because I pretty much know this stuff. And I would think that you would want, because it's like I watch a lot of YouTubers and stuff, and you can tell the difference. I'm excited about this. I love bringing this to you guys. That I would do this regardless. I'm not doing this for a job, even though that is my dream eventually to do. I'm just excited to be here telling you guys about this. This stuff's awesome. I think it's fun. I'm dressing nice because I care and I want to put a lot into this. I care about you, dear viewer, and I would hope that that you are enjoying this. So I think it's really disrespectful if I was to just look at something for a day or two, which a lot of YouTubers do, which I am kind of shitting on them, but hey, it's like, and it's like you watch a 5 minute, 10 minute video about something where they cover it once and then you don't even know what the fuck it was going on. So that's kind of my thing, is that we're going to be covering a lot of this stuff. We're going to be recapping and we're going to be going over it so that at the end, you really know I feel that you learn something. You know who these people are and what happened. So I think that's very important. That's what we're going to be doing, and I hope that you guys. I think I will find my audience. I'm actually very confident that I'm going to find the guys that want to know this stuff and that want to be taught like this. So, yeah. So we were talking about that. So let's recap. I'm not recapping the old. We're just recapping the '80s and the stuff. So we were smuggling heroin. We were smuggling heroin. We were taking the proceeds, and then we were putting them in the Vatican Bank ourselves. Even though I wasn't alive then, I did it. No, I didn't. I'm just kidding. Just joking. We're just joking. But that's we're gonna. I'm gonna continue to talk after that. After we deposited in, hey, I get my buddy Roberto Calvi to make 10 to 15 different show accounts to then spread the money throughout. And then I get my priest to write a letter saying, "Hey, you do business with the Catholic Church. Looks good." So, and then I use that to start borrowing money from anyone that will lend it to me. A lot of the money was and a lot of the money was borrowed from Banco Ambrogio, Roberto Calvi. So it's like he was working, he was one of the chairmen, I think he was the lead chairman, but he still had people to answer to. So when all this was going on, he took, oh, look at the profits we're making. Oh, look, the church backs it up with this letter. Why don't we lend them more money? It looks like they're doing great thing. Because these companies were for various different things that they were doing, saying that they were making the profits from. So, and that's where it's almost like, okay, if you were gonna sell the drugs and then do it that way, if you would have stopped there, that's almost like whatever, bro. But it's like, okay, but then you go one step further and you borrow billions of dollars from people and with no intention of paying it back, and you're not like, well, I wonder if this is going to collapse the whole country. Like, guys, that's what it could. It's almost like it's like you're playing on that level of game now. We're not playing little games where it doesn't really matter. Like, no, you're talking about like a whole church, a whole entire church institution that's 2,000 years old, and you're pissing that away because you just want, and none of this money came back, and it's all greed. And it just goes to show how deep these things can run in the institutions that claim to be the best. So, you know, very, very insidious stuff you're doing. It's like if you're doing a drugs thing, just take that and whatever, bro. But then you're using that to borrow money that you know you have no intention of paying back. Like, that's not so great. But all these people were eventually, well, like, I guess let's bring it into what caused the downfall of all of this. So eventually, they were doing this. Oh shit. Yeah. No. Eventually, they were doing this, and they did it, and then they got money and stuff. Are going up to the '80s. I mean, this scheme did not last very long. Only a couple of years until it was found out. Because it's almost like it became a Ponzi scheme. Then they were borrowing money and using that money to pay off people. So I mean, there were very different levels to this scheme, and like I said, very insidious stuff. But what caused it all to come crashing down? Well, they started borrowing like crazy, and eventually they borrowed up to a $1.3 billion with a B. That's a lot of money. So it was these 10 to 15 shell corporations that borrowed the money. They had no intention of paying it back, so eventually the bill came due and it all collapsed. And in 1982, it's like, well, so something was going on. So in 1982, Roberto Calvi is found hanging from a tree or hanging from underneath a bridge in London. And a secretary jumped to her death. She's probably pushed to her death. She she was pushed to her death. Like the day before, the week before, he was found hanging on a bridge, and he was found hanging with 2 bricks in his pocket. And it's funny because he could have really been the one to blow the lid on the whistle of this whole entire thing. And he dies, unfortunately. Hey, maybe not unfortunately. Maybe he got what was coming to him. So, but when this came out, the church didn't handle it well. They didn't handle it well. They used their sovereign immunity to refuse investigations and the stuff. That's the thing too. Part of it is that Archbishop Paul McInnes. He never had any repercussions from this. He kind of just got to. I mean, he was. I don't think he was able to be lead chairman anymore, but he pretty much got to wipe his hands with it and ride away off into the sunset. So Roberto Calvi ended up hanging, obviously. So that wasn't good. And then the Lucio Gelli, He how did he die? Probably not in a good way. I'm gonna add that later. But so the church, when this all came out, the church was like, "No, we're not doing it. We refuse to cooperate with your investigation. We're moving everybody, and we're not taking any accountability for this happening." So it's like, so all that stuff that was going on with the religious works, with them taking the pension, the insurance payouts for the Holocaust survivors, did not. That's it's like, so this is the cover up. It's like that's when they were covering shit up over and over again, and it's like, okay, guys. But obviously, this stuff all did come out, and we're not doing it anymore. So the bank, they refused to see. It's like they refused to admit guilt, but they did pay like $300 million. All right, guys. So when we're talking about the Catholic Church, there's one big glaring controversy, scandal, and cover up that almost, I mean, rocked the institution to its core. That's for sure. Damn near destroyed it, but it didn't. And of course, we're talking about the sexual exploitation and the abuse by children, the abuse of children by clergy, and then also the and that's unfortunate. The bigger thing is that they covered it up for decades on decades, refused to admit it, move priests around. Very, very despicable stuff that does not continue today. The Catholic Church today is a very different institution than it was even 20 years ago. A lot of people have seen the light and they've acknowledged that they've done wrong, and there's a lot more safeguards in place so that something like this can never happen again, and it should never happen again. That is something that is absolutely disgusting, revile, and makes me physically angry. I have a physical response to those type of people. They are fucking disgusting human beings, and they deserve the wood chipper. That being said, um, the cover up is the worst thing. If you're and covering it up is almost as bad as doing it. If you ask me, you might as well be in there with them. Um, Very despicable behavior. And so when we're talking about cover ups and stuff like that, well, how did they cover it up? So, and this is pretty common. One of the biggest things they did to cover things like these ups were just moving people around. So, whenever an accusation would come up, they would just quietly move the priest or whoever to a new congregation and parish and not tell them why they're being moved. That's one of the bigger things that they obviously no longer do. Another thing was keeping them in-house, keeping the investigations in-house, and using clerical confidentiality, which is that's not right. But they tried using it, so everything that you tell your priest is supposed to be done in confidentiality. He's not going to go tell other people what you were saying. The only exceptions to that are if you were committing a crime, and that is a crime. So, but back in the the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, that is a very common thing they would use to cover it up. They'd say, hey, that's the pontifical secret. Obviously not done now. They kept the investigations in house, and a lot of time, if not a lot of times, sometimes if there was abuse that was proven, they would have the survivors sign non-disclosure agreements and have them and provide for them financially. So it was like, oh, if we provide for you financially, please don't go tell anybody. That was done. It was covered up. And I mean, this all became a huge thing, and it came out, and I think like the 2010s. I think Boston was where it came out the biggest. It was like a bombshell thing about them covering it up and stuff. And it's like the abuse is one thing, the cover up's the very bad thing. So, and we're going to talk about the reforms and everything that was made that so that things like this cannot happen in the future. Another tactic that was used widely and commonly is if this did go and they did get reported and were arrested, they would have these priests, they would send them to to facilities like psychiatric facilities that were run by the church, so they could pretty much get a clean bill of health, have the doctor sign off, oh hey, he's cured now, so they could say, oh hey, you're gonna go there for 3 months and be fixed. You say, oh, he was, but really nothing happened. He came a lot of, and it's documented that ones that went through that came back out, and we're doing it over and over again. So um, they also used euphemistic language. So instead of saying, hey, he diddles kids, they would be like, oh, he's a little touchy, this and that. Hey, don't leave him alone with blah, blah, blah. And that's another way they would use to cover it up, which these are very common tactics that anybody who's covering anything up uses. It's not like this is, specifically to the Catholic Church. A lot of these tactics are very common tactics and very well used. And obviously we know about these things, so there was a whistleblower eventually that did come out and we're talking about it. So, it's not like it's still going on. If it was still going on, that'd be very different, But people have come out, whistleblowers. Um, the church has instituted tons of reforms, which that's what we're going to get into next. We're going to talk about the reforms that were made and the fallout that happened to this. After, we also have to talk about another aspect of this that I do not like. This is something that, well, we'll just get right into it. Filing bankruptcy to avoid having to pay out to victims and stuff. And this is almost something that I really have to even ask my priest about, and I think I'm going to, because it's very concerning, because this is as of March 2026. The El Paso diocese declared bankruptcy, and it's like, well, why? The thing is, it's like, well, and I am Catholic, so I'm going to look for excuses. Maybe they're doing bankruptcy because they have to. My hope is that they're really not doing that. And well, it's like, well, why wouldn't the other ones help it out? I don't know. I don't know enough about church politics to know about finances and what each one does and stuff like that. But you would think that since we're all Catholic and we have the hierarchy of the Rome Church in Rome, that every parish would be financially taken care of. I don't know. Well, I don't know. I don't know. So, but that's the one of the other cover ups. One of the last part of the cover up is they're trying to get out of paying these survivors for whatever reason by declaring bankruptcy. You know, so because obviously you can't pay out settlements if you're bankrupt. But that's something that was done as of March 2026. So you know, hopefully I can make an update video about why that's different. My hope is that they closed them down and they're doing bankruptcy because they closed it down. But you would think that those survivors would then be paid out by a different one. But who knows? But next, we are going to talk about the reforms that came from this and what they do today about it. So, as we're talking about this, the child sex scandal and what was done and everything, I think there's a couple places that we need to mention that are really the places where this happened. One of the biggest ones being Rhode Island, the Rhode Island clergy members. There were 300 victims accused by 75 priests, and this is going back decades. So that's the thing, is it went back decades. So that was, I think, in 2023 it came out that they had to. Oh, so we have to back up a little bit. So the thing is, whenever an accusation did come out or was made, there was a note made of it. There were records kept by the clergy, but those weren't shared with law enforcement. So like that's part of the in-house thing. But they do exist. The records exist that if this priest was accused, then it's in paper. So in Boston, it was ordered that they have to release all of those files. And the sad part of this is like, so I wanted to talk about the Boston one specifically because of the consequences and the lack thereof consequences. 24% of those even accused even faced charges, and then of that 26%, only 14 were convicted. So out of 75 of them, only like 26 actually got charged, and then out of those 26, only 14 were ever convicted. And and then looking at the convictions, none of them were really. It was a slap on the wrist, you know, and it shouldn't have been. But here we are talking about it. So the next place I want to talk about is Maryland. Maryland was another archdiocese that uncovered 650 victims by 150 priests. Very not good. Some other notable mentions are New Jersey and Washington State. New Jersey, New Jersey, New Jersey, they reached a historic $180 million settlement for the victims. So at least, and it's like all the money in the world isn't going to give you back your innocence, but we can try. We can try. And as we're going, there's other things the church has done to combat this, like setting up counseling and setting up stuff and making reforms. So I think that's it. Um, the last one is Los Angeles. So Los Angeles, they haven't, which everything's bigger out there. So $880 million settlement was reached for these victims in Los Angeles. So, yay, yippee. All right. So, talking about all this and talking about the corruption in the church, a recap. We talked about the 1500s and selling positions in the church, selling indulgences, the corruption that led to the Protestant Reformation. We jumped ahead to the 1940s with the corruption in not paying out victims of the Holocaust, the creation of the IOR, which brought us into the corruption of the 80s with the mafia and the smuggling and the offshore accounts and the borrowing tons of money, causing $1.3 million or $1.3 billion, and this is in the 80s, so $1.3 billion is a lot of money, causing that whole financial collapse. Because Banco and Bellagio did not recover from that. That was a collapse, and a lot of people lost a lot of money. So there were people hurt by this on the end. Your investors, your everyday average investors, were the ones that were hurt, and only 400 million or 300 million was paid by the church. So that leaves like eight. Actually, that's like 800. Yeah, like 800 million. That was just eight. Someone had to eat that. Obviously, the mafia wasn't giving it back. So all of this led to the reforms that we are going to talk about. So specifically, the reforms that we're going to talk about in regard to the sexual abuse are like, so in many U.S. states, all like the ones I mentioned, Maryland, New Jersey, Los Angeles, which is in California, they have created laws and passed laws that got rid of the window of limitations on these charges. So, because obviously something like this, it might take a while for you to come out and say about it. And I would hope that anybody that has been abused, um, please don't suffer in silence. It's easy for me to sit there and say that because I haven't been on your end of this, but buddy, Boulder. They got a Boulder. He's trying to mess up my thing. Boulder doesn't like when I'm talking. He doesn't understand it. He's like my emotional support pet. So he's like, "Oh man, what's going on?" But we're all good, buddy. We're all good. So, but as we were talking about, many U.S. states have gotten rid of the window of limitations on these charges against priests. So if you were abused, please tell somebody. Please don't suffer in silence. The only thing suffering in silence does is give your attacker the ability to do it again, And not saying that you not saying anything, because I understand it's hard. That's a very hard thing to talk about. But please try to find the courage to come forward and discuss what happened to you. And if you need an advocate, I mean, I will advocate for anybody that wants my help. Um, I mean, if you come to me and ask, I will help you the best I can. I will say that. I'm not gonna sit here and say that and then not. No, if you come to me and ask me for help, we'll figure it out together. So, but moving on from that, In New Jersey, which we talked about, where the $180 settlement came out. Um, the New Jersey Supreme Court ruled that they must unseal all of those clergy documents and stuff, so that survivors can have an easier time of um, being believed and getting compensation. So, um, in the church specifically, so now there's a zero tolerance policy in the Catholic Church. If you come with any sort of accusation against your priest or any of the clergy, there is zero tolerance. It will be reported not only to the church officials and stuff, but also to legal officials, to the cops. Um, it's a zero tolerance policy. All zero tolerance, 100% transparency. So things like this will no longer, hopefully, not go on in the future. So, and that's not everybody that's in the church is responsible for this that happened, especially the ones that weren't even there. But this, as we move forward, it's something that, you know, we can all hopefully grow from, and all be vigilant that it never happens again. You know, um, with the zero tolerance, in accordance with zero tolerance, there is no priest shuffling. So if somebody is accused of a crime, they are immediately removed from that, and they are not put around anybody until the allegations are cleared or confirmed. So, as before, like we talked about, they would do priest shuffling. Wherever you were accused, they would take that priest and just move him somewhere else in the country or the world. That no longer happens. If you have something against you, if you have an allegation that comes against you, it is discussed and dealt with right there. Um, like we said, the pontifical secret was removed, which I don't think that was ever valid in that context anyway. But so, you know, if a priest gets that reported to them, they are going to say something. So it's like all the problems and all the things that led and caused this to happen, they are getting rid of. So that's a good thing. Attack where that came from. So um they created there's like a papal board of sexual education. So now they educate people, not only the clergy, but people in the congregation and everything, about what sexual abuse is, the signs and things to look out for, and who to report it to. They do annual trainings on, or they do more than annual trainings. They do trainings on that, but they release an annual report on how they are doing with it, and if any places need improved upon and stuff like that. So not only are they created these things and they do them, but they also have a board that oversees all of it and makes sure that it's up to snuff. Um, every so and then with this, every diocese has a victim advocacy coordinator, and this is somebody who his main job is to advocate for the person, to help them get services, to help them get compensation, anything that they would need help with. Each diocese has their own dedicated person for this. So, and it's like, I mean, those are all the reforms that you would expect to see happen, and then it takes it a step further. This is, I mean, it's something that everybody should look out for, obviously. But yeah, so as before, what you had, they covered it up and pushed away was where don't look over here, da 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 da. Zero tolerance, there was a tolerance for it, obviously. All of these things were reformed. We got zero tolerance. If there's an accusation, it's reported immediately to the proper officials. We have everything. Come on, buddy. All right, guys. So we're gonna recap and cover everything that we talked about, go over it. So obviously the church started as not an institution, started with the story of Jesus and everything. But as the church grew, everybody came together, and then it became one big powerful institution that got huge. As it became more powerful, it got more corrupt. How did it get more corrupt? It got corrupt by selling positions to the church and selling indulgences. and that led to the Protestant Reformation, which was awful. But then you have all that history till we get up to the 40s with the creation of the IOR, the bank that took Nazi money in, and who knows. But they also got their tax from they got like $9 million from Germany as a generosity tax. Jesus, Jesus, help me do this video. But that led so the IOR was doing that, not paying out the Holocaust survivors insurance policies. That then that leads us into the 80s with the mafia and the heroin smuggling and the offshore accounts and the and then the borrowing of money and blah 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 blah, blah. And the borrowing of money, which then when the mafia ties, which then led to the sexual abuse scandal, which was very awful. And I think I honestly, all that other stuff is excusable. And this isn't excusable, but the reforms are good, and I accept that, and I am still choosing to be a part of this institution. That being said, it is the most despicable part of the history with the Catholic Church. And it just goes to show that if you have something and you've made a reputation for it and stuff, don't try to cover up your reputation. The best thing would be to come clean and then go from there. But don't try to cover it up. It never works. I mean, maybe cover-ups have worked. That's why I've never heard of them. But the ones that didn't work, boy, did it sure hurt it twice as bad. I mean, you can make an argument the sexual abuse scandal. I mean, it was a blow to the Catholic Church. It really was. And they're recovering from it now, thank God. But that's that's what caused these things to happen, and that led to the reforms, that we talked about, with the payouts, which are nice. Money is always nice, but then with also the oversight and the getting rid of the zero tolerance and the accusations being given to law enforcement. Pretty much, they got rid of just doing the cover up stuff. They should, and you know, you should never put somebody's personal, or you should always put people's personal well-being above an institution itself, because the institution is there for the people. And it's like, okay, well, if you're going to put the institution above the people, why is it even there? Why are we even doing this? But so that's corruption in the Catholic Church through the ages. I think that's going to be the name of the video. If you've watched this far, I really appreciate it. This time we didn't have so many ums and so's, so I think this one went a lot better that way. There I go with them damn ums. But if you followed along this far, please drop a subscribe, a like, give me a comment. Let me know what you think about this whole situation. Maybe let me know what you don't like about this situation. Maybe tell me about myself. Maybe tell me about my ball spots that are that are not so good. But yeah, I really enjoy doing this, guys. I'm gonna continue to do this. I think I found my calling in a way. So I hope that you follow along with me. Follow along on this journey, guys. See ya. No, I'm not doing that stupid thing.